front-loaded all my meetings this morning, so I can actually wear real.
Yep, live.
Great. Good evening. It's Wednesday, August 2nd at 5:04 p.m. This working session of the State Board of Education is called to order. My name is Jack Jacobson. I'm the Ward 2 representative and vice president. I'll be leading the meeting until our president, Karen Williams, arrives. We have a quorum of members. I'd like unanimous consent to allow board members Laura Wilson-Phelan and Mark Jones to participate by phone. Are there any objections? With no objections, their participation is authorized, and Laura is already on the line. I will shortly be turning the meeting over to our executive director, John Paul Hayward. Today's meeting largely consists of administrative issues, including the board's and related agencies' budgets. I will turn it over to John Paul Hayward for the board's portion of that discussion.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for being here to talk about this, for all these dry issues, not boring, but dry. So we have a number of documents in front of you, and I will get copies to the folks who just got here. The first thing that I'd like you to look at is our budget versus actual report, which I sent to you an email. It's going to take me a second, I'll get there. The budget versus actual report, it says that at the top left. So this provides the information about exactly where we are in our current spending levels. Where is it there? In general, we're doing well. We still have funding in our budget lines, which is good. It means that we have been doing our best to spend in the right ways according to our program budget. I did send.
Can we get more down here?
Sure. Right.
Just the one.
So the different agencies, the Office of the Student Advocate and the Office of the Ombudsman and the Office of the State Board itself have been spending according to the program budget that was passed by the board in September of last year. I did send a copy of that. Did anyone? I thought I had read a copy of it, but I don't remember it. So the budget versus actual, the second page of that sheet is that program level budget. So it's complicated to do these comparisons between the two without these two sheets in front of you. So when we go to the next part of the discussion, that's why I wanted to make sure that you had both of these in front of you. The program versus actual, which is this sheet that has all of the information about what our program level is, includes things like community outreach, engagement, those types of things. That's what we really need to start focusing on for FY18. So we'll get to that in a second. But for FY17, there's one more part that I wanted to go over quickly with you now, which is the other larger sheet of paper. It just says purchase card at the top, but this is a list of all of the expenditures that the agency has done for this fiscal year so far. It lists every purchase card transaction. It lists every PO or purchase order transaction. It also lists all of our direct vouchers, which we've been using for our fellows, as well as per diem requests for conference travel, everything like that. I thought it was important for everyone to have all of this information in front of them as we're working through the rest of the FY18 budget to kind of see what we have been spending our money on in FY17. That helps provide a better context of what we're going to be doing for the FY18 budget to make sure that there's nothing that we need to change. Do we need to add, for instance, additional money for conferences? Do we need to reduce a line here for fellows? And whatever we need to do in accordance with what the board wants us to do for our budget, that's where we are. That's why I want to make sure that this is in front of you.
Question.
Sure.
Looking at some of these purchase card orders, for instance, NASB's purchase orders, those reimbursements. Does NASB reimburse us for some of these?
Not for conferences. Not for our conferences. No. Our dues for NASB go to a number of things, but they provide. For instance, the New Member Institute that you attended, that was actually covered. There is funding for some additional travel through NASB. We did receive also a grant this year from NASB, so that is helpful as well. But in general, the hotel costs and airfare for NASB conferences are not
Okay, but they come
our
out of
dues.
our,
So
okay.
they come out of our budget.
Okay.
But they're, yeah. So yeah, so I wanted to have you have this for your discussions today and also for the rest of the month into next working session. As you're thinking about ways or suggestions of how to adjust the budget, it's important for you to know where we are currently. The last piece of paper is a single piece that was sort of on the back of that one. This is the anticipated and pending expenditures. Did I give you one? Sorry. One. Mark, do you have one? Okay, good. So this is the information that has been submitted to the administrative committee, and they've reviewed these expenditures. So we're in the process of making these purchases, either for the student advocate ombudsman or for the state board's office. So these are in process, and that's why they're not listed on the sheet, but they have been approved and are going through the process. So I'll update the final chart once we have all those in place as well. Are there any questions about sort of how that process works, or why certain things were, what sort of the differences between purchase card, direct voucher, and PO? Great. Sure.
What are these tote bags for? Are they gonna be used for all events or a specific event?
So the CSA is the Chief Student Advocate, and so they Faith wanted some tote bags for giveaways and those types of things, with branded with the CSA's logo.
Got it.
Do it also have the SBA logo?
I don't believe it does. I wasn't involved in the design, so I don't believe it does.
I mean, I'm just throwing a suggestion that as we make these things, if the idea is that we're all in office, that the SBA should be done. Along with contact, contact information.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly talk to Joy and Faith about that when they I'm assuming they're coming up, but I don't know.
Just try brand them so we can use them throughout each agency.
It makes sense to me.
And then it would come out of all agencies' budgets rather than just hers,
Right.
which I don't know that I'm comfortable with. I think we have better things we can spend our limited discretionary funds on as a state board.
I meant it more just that that's the home office, so.
No, I agree with that.
Well, it should be, but, I mean, they should be consulted on this.
Should it have the logo because we are the lead agency for the State Board of Education? Does it have our logo on their documents?
No, not usually. But like I said, I think it's something that the board can discuss, and maybe the administration committee should tasking Joe already. Should add that as a discussion item with the three offices and decide sort of how that structure works. I mean, part of this is it's all new, making sure that we have starting in FY18 we'll have 3 different budgets. So it's a little bit new of trying to exactly figure out where the boundaries are and what everything goes. And I know Joe has already been involved in those discussions with all 3 of us. So we'll be righted, and we will all understand where we are on October 1st. I have no doubt. Right?
So, in looking at the FY17 budget as we prepare for FY18, I think in the budget oversight and then the budget conversations of the council, Mr. Grasso was very clear that he wanted to see progress towards independent budgets within a clear path forward beginning at least on October 1. Is there a way to pull up FY17 budgets for each of the 3 offices by category and compare to actual spending, and utilize those to really look at the FY18 budgets? Because we have not approved the FY18 budget yet, correct?
We've approved the number.
We've approved the
to be
numbers,
sent to
not
council,
the-
but not the expenditures. Right.
Expenditures, right. So each agency
Yes.
will need to prepare a budget
So you're talking about doing an updated sort of program level budget?
Right, but split out by what the three agencies
Right.
have spent this year.
Yes, I believe we can do that.
Because
The
that's
state
good.
board can certainly do that. I hate to speak for Joy and Faith about them being able
Well,
to do that.
for FY 17, all their expenditures are under the state board, so we should be able to do that.
Right, but the program level budget was actually separated in FY 17 as well. And
Right.
so we should be able to track that as well for all three agencies or offices. Yeah, okay, good.
We're on track to spend by the end of the fiscal year.
That's a really good question. We are on track, but I was able to find some additional cost savings. So the board has some leeway in additional purchasing, which I just got today.
And the fiscal year is over when?
Well, it's September 30th, but our last actual day to pay anything is really September 15th, because they shut everything down about 2 weeks beforehand. So we have a very limited time to be able to spend money, but we do have some additional funds.
The personnel is gonna be cleared out kind of by the end of the FY.
Yes, it should be.
And then non-personnel.
Well, there was a shift of some money, a reprogramming of some money from personnel because of the savings from not filling certain positions for the fiscal year. So that's where some of the cost savings come from.
Okay, and then, but we're on track, you think, with non-personnel, or we can still talk about what?
I think we have some ability to be a little bit more flexible with the FY 17 spending on what we would like to spend. I think. So that's one of the conversations I think we should have at some point too.
And do we have the ability to prepay any of our FY 2018 costs?
We do have the ability to prepay some costs, not many. We can prepay some things like conferences, so that was actually one of the questions that I have on my list, is to ask if we wanted to attend NASB, so we can start getting the airfare and hotels for that booked. I mean, first of all, it's much cheaper now than it would be to wait until next fiscal year anyway, but it's also a good use of that type of money. So once it's in NASB. It's in Atlanta, November 1st to the 4th.
Right.
On the schedule.
Yeah, it should be in your schedules already. It's a fantastic conference, honestly. I think first of all, they do a really, really great job of putting together some really strong panels, but they also really provide some great mentor support for board members to talk with each other about what's going on in their boards, in their states, and you really get a lot of great information from that conference.
Do you know where it's?
Atlanta.
Yeah, where?
It's at the, I just learned today, it's at a Starwood Hotel.
And the days again,
November 1st to the 4th. So we would need to move our working session for November. It's at the Westin Buckhead. Yeah, so I mean, it doesn't have to be right now, but I mean, you can email me sometime soon, and I'll send an email out as well to make sure to remind folks. Just let me know if they want to attend a conference, and then we can start looking at it. It's a really good idea to do that. Other items that we could potentially book ahead, we are still looking at a supply order, which you can see on the pending sheet for the 5th floor, and so we could start booking some of those supplies as well, not only for the 5th floor, but for the 7th floor as well. We know that those expenditures are going to come. I hesitate slightly to do that because we don't have a whole lot of extra room to store supplies and things like that. So even though it's a good use of our funds, it's also a challenge for us logistically to make sure that we actually have space for those sorts of things. But we also, there are the potentials of doing things like a short-term consultant for research or to present a report to the board on something. That's an option that we could do. It's a challenging time to do that because of the time to be able to submit a report back to the board by September 30 is pretty tight, but it's potential. Yes.
And then I did have one question. There have been questions both from our sister agencies and from Councilmember Rosso on the $2,500 purchases above the $2,500 level needing authorization. How many times do we hit that in this fiscal year?
we have hit that, well, both the student advocate and the ombudsman submitted a longer list of expenditures for the FY17, and that's what these expenditures were. And so a number of those were over, so those were all counted as sort of one approval, but I wouldn't say more than 4 or 5 times.
Do you agree with that?
So I would say that sometimes we don't know, because sometimes we're sending approval over for what we think an estimate of it will be, so that once we get a quote, we can kind of move forward with it. So I know I estimated some printing at 4,000 because of how much we spent in the past, and then the quote came back much less than that. So sometimes we're asking for approval so that we can kind of move forward with things quickly once the quote comes through, and it's not really reflective fully, but I would say when we're ordering supplies or when we're, I don't know, I would say definitely I think less than 10, but often when we are trying to do that, we're trying to also move very fast.
And how much is this delay?
I'm sorry, say what?
How long has the delay been?
Sometimes like a week, and I think it's probably because I think we're sending it out, and I don't know if we've definitely come up with a process. Maybe we came up with a process like every this time of the month, and then we would know how much time it would come back, because I also know that I miss emails. Other people might miss emails. But I can think of, I put out a request and I followed up within a week's time. Just because I was like, hey, I haven't heard anything. But I don't know if I had made any other, just one other $2,500 request for that, which was translation of materials. And I think it was within a week.
Okay. Any reflection on?
So, before we go, I can say I went through my emails to the extent possible today looking at that. Still having issues getting in line, so bear with me, I'm going to be off here. But I found 4 requests since the beginning of January.
And what was your turnaround time? Generally?
Within a week.
I'm just trying to understand. And so the board members fully understand and the community fully understands.
And typically what we've tried to do is, and I think there was a second email, did you see this? And I had missed it. That happened probably 72 hours after the initial request. And then we've typically, yes, approved if we have the supporting documents, and within 24 hours, if nobody objects, we've agreed to move it forward.
Okay.
And we could certainly formalize something along those processes where if there's a request, a reminder, no objections, it moves through.
Yeah, because sometimes I think, I mean, I'm on a board myself, and sometimes I have to be asked things, and I get things coming through, and I just don't see it. So
Yeah.
we've agreed on the board that I want that these types of requests will come to me by this particular day, and I will know to respond on that day. So I think maybe that would be helpful, also for us to also try to have a longer runway as to when we're doing this for however long this process still exists, just to make sure that it's also fair on both sides. Because sometimes we're asking very quickly, and we might want to move forward very quickly, but you may not see the email. So also just making sure that we have that we're all on the same page, like when they're going to come in and when to expect the turnaround. But I think most of our purchases might be still in the 2000s, but a little bit below that mark.
Thank you. It's very helpful.
Yeah, and I think there is, process is also another thing that I think would be helpful to sit down and talk about that as well, to make sure that we all know what the steps are throughout the process and how long sometimes it can take, because government procurement is not a swift animal. So sometimes it does take a lot longer than any of us want to buy anything. Which is
But I was in that meeting with Councilmember Grosso with some of the procurement folks, and my understanding is that they are meeting or have met with all 3 offices to talk about best purchase practices for.
So we haven't
They
today,
offered that.
but they offered it, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'd encourage us to take them up on that offer. I know some people have been on vacation because it's summer, but I'd love to get that nailed down so that.
I think we were going to meet with them closer to the end, like as we get closer. They also have a lot going on right now. At least that's what I understand, and I know we have a lot of things we're trying to procure and like start. So I think it was helping us think about what we need to do for FY18. So we were hoping to meet with them. At least I got the impression. Like,
I'll follow up with
Yeah.
Director Shutter anyway and just see.
but they've been very responsive to the other, as we've had some other questions. They seem to have been responsive, but they do want to help us with the business practices.
I want them
And
to have to
audit.
help us with that too.
Yeah, very much. So are there any other questions on FY 17 before we start the discussions on FY 19? Great. So FY 18 and 19. So in FY 18, we were successful in getting additional positions both for Faith's office and for the state board, and fully moving one of the program support people to the Office of the Ombudsman. So we will have individual people in both of those to do the program support, which I think is going to be very helpful, actually. We're not having a split staff member, I think will be very helpful. So we've been working with the administration committee on the operations or administrative support person that the council provided to us, and we're hoping to have someone in place as soon as possible after October 1st, but we want to make sure that we get the right person as well. So there's been some discussions on exactly what that means. So for FY 18's non-personnel services budget, my suggestion would be for us to take a look again at the program budget that I provided, the 1.91 from last year, and just have some initial discussions on items that we think might be higher priorities or need to shift slightly in the FY 18 budget expenditures, rather than just this rough sketch of sort of what we have been spending in FY 17.
Before you go on,
Sure.
I have a question.
Of course.
So is it my understanding we're in the process of hiring a policy analyst, and then in addition, there's gonna be a new position starting October 1?
Correct. Correct. Yeah, last year from the council, we were able to secure an additional policy person.
That's what I thought.
Yep.
No. And the new position is program support, or it's whatever we call it. It's whatever
Yeah, I
it's
mean, it's a more administrative role.
Got it.
Yes. To help us actually with this type of budgeting type thing, so that we can actually provide better clarity on a much more regular basis than frankly I.
So you envision them doing procurement and all that stuff?
And some of the HR.
So the council committee report was pretty clear that this full-time equivalent was for administrative purposes. So looking at HR and procurement issues. With the express intent that it would free up SPOE resources for the state board staff to do more engagement and outreach work. Unquote.
Yeah, which I think is great. And I really think Joy and Faith were also advocating on this, because I think we all know that this is something that is significantly needed, is having someone who can help us with this type of thing.
So, on the budget, I'm going to suggest, as I did last year, that the public meeting transcription perhaps be a cost savings of about $9,000, and put that into additional contract support for outside experts or whatnot to support our policy work. I just think that the transcription services are so rarely used, and I know that they're, particularly with individuals in chaired committees, they wanted additional support, and sometimes outside consultants, and I would just once again suggest that we take a really strong look at that option.
Quick question, the scholarship fund?
Yep.
Is that what we decided just to allocate for this FY, or is that all we have left?
That's all we have left in the fund.
Okay.
And Jamaica is doing some additional research on the establishment of it, but we just don't have that ready, so it's not fully baked to do much with it right now.
Comment on Jack's point, because I objected to that last year. And my concern is that, I know it's true, people don't go to the transcripts a lot. But if you want to do some research, if you want to actually go back and look at something, it's so much more efficient than being able to go back to the videos, which I think is what you were saying, is we have the video writers. So I wonder if there's a way to sort of compromise it and say that, instead of having the transcript, because I agree it's a lot of money, we have the videos, that there could be sort of a pretty serious note taking. So that at the end of the session, you'd have something that would sort of say, you know, at 5 minutes, at 10 minutes, at 15 minutes, so that you had a sense of, if you wanted to go through the video, what were the topics he was talking?
Oh, that's could be an elegant solution, or perhaps we could do minutes as we do for working sessions, and the minutes could reflect the actual time on the video, There's some combination thereof. I wonder how that could work from a staffing point. And I looked hard to director for that.
So if we did something like minutes, then that record would then not be able to be public until the board approved it at the next public meeting. So we would have additional delay in getting that information out and being transparent about it. I think it potentially could work. So generally the process for minutes is the fellows are the ones who do a first draft, then it goes through Paul and Maria, and then it comes to me for a review before it goes to anybody else. And so that takes a while. If we try to do the timing, I mean, we could try it and see how it works, maybe in September, and see.
In a way, it might be easier to do than the minutes, and then for you to become the basis for doing the minutes, because you're.
I don't want to make it, I'm trying to make it easier, not more complicated.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out exactly what you mean. So, like, at 5 minutes, you just put the topic of what we're talking about? Or
Yeah,
how
you
would-
know, Lynette names task force, you know,
So hit the highlights in a time.
yeah, you know, Jack raises a question about, next meeting, and you just, so it would be, you know, it's reasonably detailed so that you could really go back and find things at certain minutes, but
Let's,
the point isn't that you're not summarizing, so in that sense, it's not an intellectual exercise the way minutes are, right? But you're just trying to sort of say, this is what's happening.
well, let's, let me have the staff take a look at, maybe we can, sort of test out an old public video and see if we can, how quickly it goes, and we'll get back to you guys on whether or not we think that's a viable solution. Paul, can you close the door? Other questions, other suggestions?
So this question on development is for the entire staff and, or is it for the staff?
No, it is for board and staff.
This is what we're spending money on.
It is for board and staff. That's a really good point, Karen. Thank you for bringing it up. So last year in FY17, we budgeted $2,000 per person for 15 people to travel to conferences, and sort of left it up to the board members on what and which conferences they wanted to go to. This is the budget that we had intended to use for the NASB conference as well, which we did book slightly. We did the same thing last year in FY16 and used some of those funds for some of the travel that folks that we knew that were going, because the conference was earlier last year. If you remember, it was mid-October. So we had used some of FY16 monies for that purpose as well. One of the things we noticed, and you can kind of see this in the chart of expenditures, is that conferences are typically more than $2,000 per person. Once you include hotel, airfare, registration, and per diem, they're really close to $2,500 and sometimes even a little bit more. So I would suggest either increasing this amount or putting limitations on, if it's a dollar amount of $2,000 and that's the cap, then board members and staff need to understand that anything above that would be out of their pocket. It's really up to whatever you guys want to do on that, but it is something to consider.
So you're saying that a typical trip to say NASB, to the NASB conference, which is usually 2.5 days, is $2,500 a person?
The NASB conference is typically a little bit cheaper because of the discount we get in registration, but other conferences have been more expensive, and some of it is just because of the way that the flights have worked out, some of the, the timing. So if we know conferences in advance, clearly the airfares are going to be less, and we can usually book into the rooms. But hotel rooms, sorry.
So if I can interrupt, I think this is an exercise that each of the three agencies need to come up with and bring it to the board and proposal. Like if the state board is planning to do attend NASB, how many members are going, how much is that going to be? Same for any conferences that an ombudsman or student advocate want to go to or want to go to. Each office will have an independent budget, and if a office goes over that they will be held responsible for that. They will either have to transfer funds within their own budget, which will require board approval, or they will have to cut back on the expenses. But I don't think that's something that we can necessarily put a limit on. Like, I think we could say, does this $30,000 budget seem appropriate? And quite frankly, I would ask how much of that is the SBOE versus the student advocate versus the ombudsman, and do each of those levels seem appropriate?
Sure. I can have that book now.
And I guess, John Paul, I know you kind of mentioned it earlier, but most of the other conferences that many of us have gone to outside of NASB, they've all pretty much been above that amount, right?
Not entirely. So I actually, for the conferences that I've attended, I've got scholarships, and so there was no charge to the board for those. But I think there was one conference. Again, some of it has to do with location, right? So for certain conferences, if they're in Pittsburgh versus Seattle, there's a difference in costs. So that is to come to it. But I actually think the idea of a proposal to the administrative committee makes a lot of sense in doing that. So I'll work on putting that together.
Well, and a lot of this is, it's not exactly accurate to say 15 people. I did not use my travel funds this year. So there's still room in that budget.
Yep.
It's not for me, it's for the board, and it can be used as needed if one of the conferences over that. But having kind of a general guidance, looking at the conferences, what we've spent in the past. I know you were out in California. We could ballpark what that was. Was it 2,500? NASB was 15. Okay, that 2,000 seems like a decent threshold if we're sending a person. And I think we need to get bigger budget numbers and stay out of the weeds and let the staff do their work in the weeds.
One of the things, that's a good point. And one of the other things to note on this budget specifically is that 11,000 of that money that was put here was also NASB restricted funds that are from previous grants. And so those have to be used for sort of NASB expenses. So that's something as well. But you're right. I mean, I think the weeds are important. I think.
Yeah, I just wanted, if I could add one thing to kind of to what you said, Joe, is that I do remember there being a conversation around a certain amount of money being put on that, to that line item for travel. But I actually have never used that line item because we had our own funds, and so for 17. So I'm not even sure, that we need to put, kind of to your point, the ombudsman. I don't want to speak for Katie because she's student advocates, those student advocates.
So as you develop your budget for next year, if you determine you need nothing for conferences and professional development, that is absolutely your choice. I would probably, as a board member, question that because you could probably need some professional development for your staff, and that's our oversight capacity. We can ask that question. But ultimately, it's up to you to develop a budget that you deem fits the needs of your office and the same for Vic.
And last year, I think we did move in that direction where we did offer budgets in that way, where we said, I think I put $5,000 or something like that in that line item. And then what we also realized was, especially if I'm looking at what the categories are, there were other areas where we may have had cost savings internally. Like we didn't do all certain amount of printing or something like that. And so instead of doing that, I know one of my staff persons wants to go on an additional conference or something like that. So I think we did last year, and we could probably give you a
So before you came in, I asked John Paul to look at each of the offices under the state agency and look at what your original budget was and where your at expenditure lies within those budget categories this year. And I would expect that each of the three offices would come up with budgets that probably more accurately, more closely reflect the actual spending, not necessarily the budget from last year. And we'll use that to build budgets for FY18. That makes sense. And then as part of the board's oversight capacity, if there are significant changes later in the year after the budget has been approved, you'll just need to come before us and say this needs to be changed, and here's why. And I wouldn't see any issues as long as there's good justification. It's going to take 2 or 3 years of history to develop a real accurate budget.
So I guess my question would be, are you saying just to use sample categories at this point? So the ones that we see now, the grabber office
As a part of, well,
Because it's all in non-personnel
Right.
funds.
right, but once you adopt a budget, and we, as board through our oversight capacity, approve that budget, I would expect that if there are substantial changes to it, you're overspending significantly, or you're underspending, and you need to transfer money, that you will inform the board of that.
I think the question becomes, actually, for most of those expenses, we don't have to transfer money. It's just kind of, I don't wanna speak, because you were better able to speak to this than I, but like, if we're transferring from, we achieve cost savings in personnel funds, for instance, and then we moved it over to NPS, that would actually require something
So
like.
I'm stepping a step back from district budgeting, where everything is in two categories, personnel or non-personnel. You will have program expenses. For the board to exercise oversight and ensure that you're meeting the goals of your offices, of the board, and being fiscally responsible to the citizens of the district, if there are significant changes within personnel, we should be aware of that and made aware of that when that budget change needs to happen.
I think the hope is to also have the ability to see that. And the reason I say that, which is, it looks like we'll have a conversation later about like having that administrative person, because right now we're struggling to like.
Right, and I think that's, we can talk a little bit about that now. That administrative person in the budget documents from the Education Committee of Councilmember Grasso is on the Board of Ed side, but because we have a fiscal and oversight responsibility of your offices, that person should be there to support you to ensure that if things need to be adjusted, that gets flagged in a timely basis, so that you can meet your needs to influence the board. And I think we're all committed to ensuring that all three offices under the agency of the board operate in the best interest of the students and taxpayers.
If it's appropriate, I'd like to comment on the conference question that was being discussed a moment ago.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Is that good? So one thing, I just did like a quick little addition of all of the money that got spent on conferences last year. This is across all three offices. So I'm not sure what the state board staff specifically is, but it's around like $35,000 at least that we're spending on largely staff. And I'm talking SBOE only at this point, staff attending conferences. And I want to raise a question about what we are returning in terms of value to taxpayers for $35,000. There are a few members in there that are going, but it is largely staff, especially when we're seeing multiple staff members going to the same conference. And it's costing over $2,500 per staff member to attend that conference. And there are things like, and I'll be really specific, on the family engagement conference that I believe at least 3 of the SBOE staff went to, plus or 2 and a member. I mean, the SBOE staff, I appreciate and value all the support you guys provide to us, but you are not implementing programs. And so I'm wondering why you're going to a conference that is all about program implementation on family engagement. Like that, to me, does not, I can see why Chief Student Advocate and Ombudsman would go to that. And I can see why members who are working to engage your communities would go to that. I don't understand why our staff is going to that conference. So I think it's not even just about what is the budget level we set for a conference. I think we need a practice in place where there is oversight over the purpose of attending all these conferences. $35,000 is a ton of money for a tiny staff to be spending on going to conferences. That is so much money. So I want to raise that and see if other people feel similarly. I do not think that is appropriate.
To Laura's point, I agree. I was just talking to Lynette, just looking at some of the hotel costs in particular. Even though a conference might be at a particular hotel, such as, I don't know, the Sheraton or the Hilton, there are purchase orders for $900, $1,000 for rooms at these hotels, and we could easily spend our money more wisely going to a hotel that may be a little cheaper next door. I think we need to, when we're looking at it, rather than going to the hotel that the conference is at, I think we can be a little more budget savvy looking at these, especially when we're looking at our conferences, making sure that our staff is going to the proper particular conferences, and then when we are going to conferences, that we are looking at other hotels and the cheapest flights in the area.
Well, I would also add one more thing to that, and that is, sorry, I have no childcare today, which is why I'm at home and I just got distracted by my kids. In a typical organization that I've worked at, you would go to a conference that's directly aligned with a professional development plan that is directly associated with your professional development goals, right? And so, for example, if I needed to improve on budgeting, I would go to a training or something, or figure out how to bring in a mentor associated with budgeting. But I don't know, like, where is this so random? How are we deciding that this is actually aligned to professional development goals and our outcomes as a staff? That to me is a mystery, and maybe it is, and you can explain it, but I don't see the connectivity.
I'll just say, I mean, I think this is the kind of discussion, I mean, I think the executive director is responsible for making good judgments about where staff should go and why and so on. I really don't think that not staying at this hotel where the conference is that's sort of town wise, whatever it is, because then you don't meet the people. But I think, if there's questions about the judgments, then, there should be a conversation with the executive director and I guess the admin committee, and if we should get involved, we could get involved.
I don't know if it necessarily informs our budget decisions, but I think it's discretionary when you start having those conversations in real practical forms when conferences come up. I don't know if it would necessarily inform our budget decision, but I do agree, we can kind of have those discussions on a case by case, kind of what makes the most sense to.
Yeah, and I think Joe's idea about submitting the proposal, I think will help negate some of those questions. I do think that the conferences that the SBOE staff have attended, I'm certainly not going to speak for anybody else, but I mean, I think the conferences that we've attended have been very fruitful and very helpful in the professional development of the individual staff members, as well as providing these services back to the board. I mean, Marcus, the Family and Community Engagement Conference, it seems to me to make a lot of sense for us to have folks who are involved in engagement at that conference to learn from people who have been doing it longer, and for making sure that if there's specific strategies for doing things, that is an appropriate conference to go to. So I'm happy to talk about individual cases for all of these conferences, either offline or with the admin committee, whenever you'd like.
So we are also actually constrained to certain prices that we can pay for hotels. So Jamaica generally helps us with booking hotel. We look online to see what the government rate is supposed to be, and that is what we can spend. So there's not, I want to stay at a Starwood hotel and I'm going to, ball out of control while I'm at a conference. So that's not happening. I think sometimes what happens when we go to conferences that are across the country, we have to be there for a certain amount of time in order to even be able to attend the conference. So I do know that in the aggregate it can seem like a lot, but I know that the rate, and we went to San Francisco, which is probably the most expensive one, was like $240 a night, which is actually not that much money per night when you're there. And I know Jamaica had a lot of conversations with the hotel to get things
I
right.
negotiated the per diem rate
Yeah,
for a lot of them because they wanted to charge the market rate, which in some cases was more than double. But because we're government, I not only locked them into the GSA per diem rate, but I also made them honor our government tax exemption status as well.
And sometimes it's hard to tell too. If you haven't attended a conference, it's hard to know what's all on the agenda. But I can say that, in the family engagement conference that I've attended, I would love it to be even more robust. It's still a new conference, but I do think there were a lot of things in the first year that both John Paul, Joanne, and I went. We were like, we think a board member should come. We also think that the person who is engaging out in the community, which Paul does a lot of that, should be able to go to that to engage, because some of it is the sessions, but other parts of it are also the other networking and partnerships that we bring back. like last year, I was able to meet with people from the National PTA and able to have a conversation with them or with other things. And so I know it can seem like a lot, and it is, although some of that money, as John Paul said, is actually money that we're not spending on staff development, but money that sits kind of stagnant based on whatever other development. So it could seem like a lot, but I also want to just say that there are a lot of times when we find professional development that's also close that we're not paying for, that's not reflected there, and that if we had to go other places or didn't live in the District of Columbia, we'd be paying even more.
No, I just want to make sure that we are maybe thinking about, the best use of our money, and if, for instance, there is a Renaissance Hotel that's right next to, or Residence Inn right next to the Hilton, which oftentimes there is, and in other board positions, I will go to conferences and I'll stay at the hotel next to the hotel that the conference is in, just because it's a cheaper use of money, and best use of our money. So I just wanted to make sure, and I just wanted to make that put out there. Not saying that we aren't already, and as Jamaica just said, that she's making sure that we're using the best use of our funds.
Like Maria, she stayed 7 blocks from the conference
Yeah,
because they were cheaper.
right.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's right.
You do try. But it's a good point. It's a good point. It's something that is a good green. Additional questions?
So what would be a timeline in getting a program budget for FY17 and then expenditures?
Well, I think the best. I think I can probably get it done for the September working session, but I recognize that Joanne and Faith are swamped right now with annual report and doing a lot of other things, and so I can do that. I can commit that to me, but I'm certainly not going to try to commit other people to that sort of timeline.
I think that we've gotten some of our updated expenses, so we can probably at least look at what was spent there and I'll turn the number back.
Sure.
We are working on that to try to keep up with our remaining expenses, so.
And again, for FY17, I don't expect a dollar by dollar accounting. I would hope that we can get there in FY18 because we'll have more clear programming budgets and broken up by the offices under the agency.
Just have one more question. Okay, about our scholarship fund that we've been saying that we're going to use for the last 3 years.
So we're still doing the research on it. It's had to take a little bit of a backburner, but we have to go search the records to find the originating documents on the establishment, and we just haven't had a chance to go over to the school to do that.
The summer school.
Sorry, all our public records.
DCPS doesn't have anything, so we
Yeah.
have to
So we're-
kind of go through microfiche at the summer.
Yeah.
See what we can find. All right.
It's gonna take us a little time.
What?
It's gonna take us a little bit of time.
All right, so we're not giving that this year.
Correct. We're not giving that.
All right.
One final point on the FY19 budget, which will be, we need to submit to the mayor's office in the fall, so we'll have that probably on the discussion as well in the September working session about dollar amounts. But one of the things to consider is how much to ask for increases on the personnel side as well as in the non-personnel side. I would suggest that somewhere in the range of 3 to 5% at least. But if there are specific instances of something that you think is important for us to ask for an additional increase on top of it, that's an enhancement, I can certainly work with folks over the next 3 or 4 weeks to write those up and make sure that they're something solid. For example, one of the things that we were able to secure this year with Councilmember Grasso's funding is the funding for the Old Council Chambers, which is actually not in our budget, but is at DGS's budget. And so those enhancements don't necessarily have to come to us. They can go to other things if we think they're important for education.
One question that I'll have, and I think it's difficult to know this in the time to submit the budget, but as we've been talking about this new administrative position, and I think we should think about this within all 3 offices of the agency, are the staff positions appropriate? Do we need to adjust some of the classifications and ask for funding to enhance any of the positions? Without sidetracking us too much, this is an administrative position for procurement, administrative duties, could it be essentially a chief financial officer position, which would be a higher salary level? And would we need a budget enhancement to accomplish that? Rather than to research associates or just whatever the titles are, do we need a research director? And would that increase the salary that we need? So I think saying 3 to 5%, I think that's the cost of living. We want to be able to give whatever that is. But I don't think we should look at just a percentage. We should look at programs. And do we have the right level staff to meet the needs of each office?
Can I make a suggestion then? We do have on the books the August 31st summer retreat. I can readjust the schedule to have a discussion on some of that for the state board side of the discussion, if that's something the board members are interested in having.
Happy to. I think in a lot of ways, though, that's for the heads of the offices, Faith and Jeff Paul, to be able to bring to the board and say, you know, we're doing all we can, but to better meet the needs of my office, this position needs to grow. And we need a research director, we need a full-time financial officer, we need a staff assistant, or we need to change a staff assistant to a director of, and what would that hour be? And then I think the board can approve that as a budget request that we can uniformly take to the council.
It's a great idea.
And that also gives us clear rationale for the ask, not just a 5% across the board.
Okay. Any other budget discussion?
I have a question in regards to the students that are on the board. Is it raising budget in here? Do they get any stipends?
Can we talk about that offline?
Sure.
Thank you.
So can you sketch out for us, John Paul, sort of the steps the discussion we're gonna have around the budget leading to a submission? In other words,
Yes. So in September, we will we'll come back with a program budget to look at for FY18 with the recommendations from the staff.
FY17.
FY18. The next year. Based on what we spent in FY16, 15, 16, and 17. Because by then we will have a better understanding of exactly what is left to spend in 17. So then we will present to the board in September working session a draft program budget of what each of the offices intends to spend or would like to spend, thinks it's best to spend the money for the next fiscal year. And then we will have discussion on that at the September working session. If there's any comments, changes, etc., from board members, we will take that back. The staff will take that back, make revisions, look at it again in the October working session, and then vote in October. Which is slightly delayed, but I think we'll be okay. Because it's only 3 weeks into the fiscal year.
and that's on the budget that we'll be spending during that year.
For FY19, we will have discussions again in September on FY19 about a top line budget based on what we think is appropriate to ask for in the next fiscal year, starting October 1st, 2018. Seems like a long time, but it's actually not. And then if there are any comments or questions or revisions from board members, we'll take that back, present it again in October working session, and then the board can vote on a resolution adopting a need for appropriations for FY19, and then that information will be submitted to the mayor.
So she does it, but
Yes, before she does her vote.
Wait, so it gets submitted when? Sorry.
I'll submit it as soon as the board passes it.
Which you hope will be in
October.
Yeah.
It
So
will
that
be-
both of these things are on the same timeline, what we're gonna do next.
Right.
So, in preparing the FY18 budget, we'll be able to hopefully look fairly at a deeper level than we had before. Programmatic spending, how much are we spending on research, how much are we spending on reports, how much are we spending on trinkets, giveaways, other things, and go through. I think for the FY19 budget, we'll need to base it off of that FY18 and say, what do we expect to come, and do we have any needs for additional research, outside spending, staff, other things to do that? And then on the personnel side, do we think our staffing plan for FY18 meets the needs for the agency? And if not, are there any positions that we need to try to elevate?
And if we have proposals for program, which might use existing staff or different staff, when would be so the timeline would be to present them not later than September.
Yes.
But will we have time, is part of the August retreat meant to discuss such things so that people have ideas for what we should be doing next year, that we should try to prepare materials for that?
We can have some of those discussions. It was not a direct intention to talk about budget at the retreat. It was more to talk about program, because then that will lead into the budget discussion.
I don't mean it, program is fine, that's what I'm saying, if there are ideas for programs.
Sure.
If there are ideas for programming.
Right. The August retreat is designed to look at our strategic plan, figure out what we've done, and then what for the next year do we need to focus on to make sure that we actually complete all the items on our strategic plan. But also then to start planning for the next 2 or 5 year strategic plan. So, yes.
So we have any retreat put on the 31st?
It is currently scheduled, yes. I don't know timing, I haven't done much. I didn't do any planning and wanting, so.
So of the board members here, do we want to have the retreat on the 31st?
I mentioned I will be out of town. I will be at a conference in Texas.
Or would you be available for retreat on the 31st of August?
Yeah, that's my first week back from vacation, so I'm saying, I guess no. Because that's a whole day thing, I can't commit to that.
Okay, thank you.
Just FYI, for you guys, it is right before Labor Day.
Yes,
Yeah,
Thursday.
I didn't just realize that, I mean, I think it is not a great day to have it, for sure. I think it's really important to have something, and
So that's not a good day, so we'll look at, do we have any, could you do a Google Calendar with some dates?
I will send out more dates.
First week of September, second, somewhere around there.
Is that Labor Day?
Does it help? I mean, would it help to try to do it on the next working session day,
The 6th.
the 6th, which is the Wednesday after Labor Day?
Yeah, that's closer to the meeting anyway, right?
Right.
Will it come and be a longer meeting, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, so what we would do is come in at like 10 in the morning
Oh,
and
do
be
it
here
all
till 7 or 8.
And run right into our work.
And just run directly into the working session.
The last will be a longer meeting.
It works for me, it works for me.
Works for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Laura, does that work?
You know, you guys should just go ahead and plan it. This is a very busy time for me, the start of the school year.
Okay.
And so it's unlikely I'm gonna be able to commit any time until October. So just go ahead and plan it if I can come on.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, committee reports. Unless we have any more budget? All right, that's a. Well, that's what it says on the agenda. And then I'm looking at them.
Everybody good? Okay, it's very short and sweet. Okay. On July 10th, the state board, with the press release to announce the opening and closing dates for ESSA task force application. Initially, the closing date was July 17th, but after much consideration, it was extended to the 24th. We received a total of 55 applications. Individuals that applied were not DC residents, were not considered for the task force. However, all applicants are encouraged to participate in planned outreach activities that are sponsored by the representatives and the ESSA task force representatives throughout their communities. We are finishing up the review process, and a press release is scheduled for later this week to announce the task force members. On August 22nd, the task force will hold its first meeting, and starting in September, the task force will meet the first Tuesday of each month. And the task force meeting calendar will be adjusted as needed. So the meeting calendar will be posted on our website so that it will be available for everyone. That's the one. Any questions?
Yeah.
Congratulations, Lynette. We're on to have you in.
I learned from you, Laura. Thank you.
Engagement?
Sure. So, well, first and foremost, I think per a helpful suggestion from our vice chair at our last public meeting, I'll be introducing a bylaw amendment resolution at our next public session to allow public comment during our public meeting, or to allow members to address those who engage in public comment during our public meeting.
So this process, it needs to be at the working session, and then at the public.
Okay.
And this is a working session.
So,
But we don't have a resolution.
right, so because there's not a public meeting this month, we'll have draft language at the working meeting next month and be able to vote on it in the September meeting.
Okay, so that's the.
Right,
Okay.
there was no rush to get language drafted by today,
Right.
because we have another working session prior to our next opportunity to vote.
Right. And apart from that, I'm really excited about some of the engagement we're doing around the high school graduation requirements task force, but I'll save that for the Educational Excellence Committee report. But other than that, that's all we have.
Laura?
Margaret, do you want to share? We had our first meeting. You want to share a readout?
Sure. So we were really excited to host our first meeting, and we had, I think, all but one task force members either attend in person or by phone, which was really great. And I think, as anticipated, we have a very dynamic and diverse and experienced group of policy experts, of teachers, of students. I mean, you name it. I think we got it. And I think that it reflected in the conversations we had during our first meeting. And so we really did a few things to really kind of shape our work over the next few months. One was obviously kind of setting some norms for our meetings and really diving deep into what our members expected to get out of this process and how they envision the meetings being conducted. And so that was really helpful. And then apart from that, I guess the meat of our meeting was asking our members to really answer 3 questions that we thought would shape our discussion over the next few weeks and months. And those questions were: 1, what do we as a city want our high school diploma to mean? 2, how should we measure the achievement of the diploma? And 3, what changes should be made? And I think that for the most part, well, 1, we got some very good answers to those questions, but for the most part, there's still many more questions than answers at this point, which we fully expected. But I think that we set a firm foundation on how the task force would operate and what our members expect from us and what we expect from our members, and then I think the feedback to those 3 questions that we consolidated, and we hope everyone's gotten, but if not, we'll make sure to send it around to you all for your review. I think the caliber of those answers will really kind of guide our work over the next few months. Did I miss anything, Laura?
No, that was great, Marcus. Much more poetic than I would have put out. Thank you.
So I would be interested in getting a more substantive, sort of hear what people's answers were for these 3 things. I don't think we got
Okay.
something. Am I missing something?
Sure. I know Maria has consolidated all of that feedback. So,
Once it's approved.
yeah, and so once we review it,
It's just, yeah, it's sitting in our inbox,
Yeah.
and then it will get shared out.
yeah, so we'll send it out there.
We hear it gets on Sunday now, or would you rather not do it until it's done?
I think me and Laura can probably commit to reviewing it and making sure that it's out to you guys by the end of the week. And then I also neglected to mention, I think we're also doing some really good things in terms of outreach. I mean, I think our discussion on Facebook is kind of growing. And even when we were able to kind of put out those 3 questions to the public on social media today that our task force members answered, even some of the answers I got on my page were very, very enlightening and very thoughtful. So the fact that both our task force members are engaging very meaningfully in this discussion and the public is also interested, I think is gonna do wonders for this process.
So you have your own Facebook page, or you have a Facebook page?
Yeah, there's a set aside Facebook group for just to facilitate the discussion.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. And then also I've taken the liberties to also kind of post and share things on my personal network, which also seems to work as well, while also driving that conversation to the group.
Yeah, I don't mind selling it. I just need someone that can do it.
Yeah, and we also, I know some of you saw this, but we also broadcast our first meeting on Facebook Live, which was also really great too. I mean, the quality was great, the sound was good.
Yeah, it sounded very good. So every education roundup I send out at the bottom has information on the high school graduation task force, with links to the Facebook group, the website, press releases, the same thing for Essence. So when you need information, it's right there, everybody is.
And I'm not sure if this happened at the last meeting, but hopefully eventually, as we begin to kind of broadcast these meetings regularly, hopefully people can engage with us in real time, which is a capability.
Yeah, we had about 55 views. So for the first time, I think that was pretty good.
Absolutely.
So is this, and I'm not trying to take any thunder from you, but if you're doing the right thing, are we gonna memorialize it to the other committee?
That's up to you.
I have
That's
a quick question on that, that I was just reminded, because I like Facebook Live and it's free, same with Twitter Live, and I noticed, we had a expense for Periscope. Why is that?
So the Periscope expense is actually for purchasing, at the suggestion of some of the members and some of the folks that listen online, microphones, so that we can all be heard more clearly on our web broadcast.
Okay.
It's the canvas to the phone, that little.
Yeah.
Okay.
For the phone.
Yeah.
And we I think at our first meeting, we also came across that as an issue, especially for members who were on the phone with us, just being able to hear in the room, so that'll help us as well.
Is there can Periscope be put on Facebook, or is there any difference in the capabilities?
So the Periscope listing on here should have been something like cell phone.
Oh yeah, no, that's fine.
It's not directly just for Periscope, so we can use it for Facebook Live.
We can
use it for Facebook Live as well.
But in the capabilities of the actual platform, using Facebook Live rather than Periscope, rather than Twitter Live, is there any difference?
Well, the one difference that I see is that with Periscope, it goes out to the Twitter audience, but we don't really capture anything after the video is done.
Okay.
With Facebook Live, the reason why we housed it within the Facebook group dedicated to high school graduation requirements is the video lives there.
Right.
People can rewatch it after and continue to comment.
Yeah.
And so.
And it removes some of the steps that we have. I mean, we download the Periscope videos to put them up, but it takes some time for us to be able to do that and to put them up appropriately. So.
And Facebook is automatic, which is what normally we use. Okay.
Right. And I mean, one of the questions that I have on that is you do have to have an account to watch the Facebook Live, don't you?
Yep.
You have to have a Facebook account.
No.
Or you have to, I think you can watch it without.
You can.
We want them to join the group so they then continue the conversation.
Right. So we can start doing that on Facebook. I just want to make sure that we can then download the videos and put them on YouTube or put them somewhere else so that in case Facebook goes the way of MySpace, we have an ability. Right? Because these are public records then. So we need to make sure that there's a way to capture that video in a way that's archivable, right, for better or worse.
That makes perfect sense. I was just wondering.
No, it's a great idea.
Have we thought about using both Periscope for Twitter and other audiences, and then also Facebook Living our working sessions and meetings in addition?
We have not yet thought of that.
I mean, unless
We can use 2 phones.
I mean, it's something that I think we mentioned earlier in one of our committee meetings, or at least maybe it was in an email to you, Paul, or something like that. Maybe how we standardize this and figure out what's the best platform to both serve those functions like John Paul talked about, but also increase the level of engagement.
I mean, in general, our Periscopes do get quite a few views during the time and afterwards. So we are hitting people that aren't able to be at our meetings, which is the whole point of that thing in the first place. I certainly don't mind necessarily doing 2. It's just a matter of having the technology available. I certainly don't want to buy an extra phone just for that purpose.
Of course.
So like right now, Paul is using his phone.
Yeah.
Before it was my phone that was being used. So it just means that we have to make sure that we have that available. So like the tripod, I bought that myself. I didn't make that.
And I have one I could bring in.
Right. So we have, and they're not like expensive or anything like that. But that's not the best of tripods, right? So if we're really going to be serious about doing these things, we need to think about: do we want a tripod that actually goes all the way to the floor? It's more stable. This one has magnets, so you can put it on a wall. I mean, so there are things to think about in that type of way that we can start talking about as part of a larger budget discussion if we want to. Because I do think it's a really important way of doing our outreach, especially for communities that can't make it to the meetings all the time.
And the feedback we get is like, I wish other agencies would live stream meetings, so people want it. I think one thing we ought to be careful with the ESSA meetings, the task force meetings, if you're gonna break them into different rooms for the breakout sessions, like we'll have to think about how do we capture that.
How do we capture that answer?
Because what was cool about the high school grad meeting was I had it set up in the corner, and it got everybody in the room, and there was a lot of people, but what I liked about it was then the groups kind of broke into, and then the one group in front of the camera, you could actually listen and watch their discussion, so.
And I know that there's like, and I think this is probably a little weedy, but there's a new technology developed by Livestream, like the company Livestream, that it's like a camera and it enables you to broadcast on Facebook Live or Periscope, whatever we want.
Right.
I don't know if it allows you to do that cross-platform at the same time, but it might be something to investigate because one, the quality of video and sound will be higher, and then it kind of gives us that flexibility.
Yeah, we did. Well, I did some small looking for a web-based camera or something like that, but they were just more expensive than frankly I wanted to spend without knowing a little bit more about that type of thing.
Right.
And we can certainly talk to our friends in the Office of Cable Television on asking them for their advice on cameras and what do they think we should do, and should, is it a cost we could jointly do with some other organizations that are in this building. The Board of Zoning or the Office of Zoning Commission, they brought, they have a meeting room downstairs. Do they have, would they like to broadcast on the web? How do we do those types of things? And also making sure that DGS actually equips rooms appropriately for that type of thing. Which, when this suite was built, the conference center, that type of web stuff wasn't available, right? So when you're thinking about those things, but when DGS is actually doing remodelizations of offices or things, they need to start thinking. What?
Remodelizations?
Yeah, remodelizations.
It's
a word, it's just slow.
I'm
I'm so slightly on vacation right now.
They should start thinking about this vacation.
It is in a week. Yes, we were thinking about it.
And I'm so excited about this because this thing does do multi-destination streaming and cloud video storage.
How much is it?
It's like, there's a plan associated, but I think at base, the camera itself is like.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that's simplistic. Still being pretty simple. You could still, if you do breakout sessions, you're not gonna get a lot of people that attend the cross-sector task force, but people can always call in to different, office call lines that you have, and you can do listen-only, settings for that. So you can still have people go with you into your breakout sessions, just provide that information, and they can still hear what's happening in different breakout sessions, and then you can come back to the live stream or still have a conference office. Sometimes it's really hard, it's harder on the, because I watched you guys on Periscope, and you can't really hear it.
That's the microphone. It does
Yeah, I mean, the microphone will help, but then just think about the breakout sessions, you don't have all these little cameras and phones,
Right.
and maybe.
And it is, I mean, it's a learning experience for all of us too, and exactly how to conduct a meeting that is being broadcast on Periscope, right? It's not the same type of thing, but we need to make sure that we're actually acknowledging the camera. Actually, to make sure that we're, you know, making, that it's an effective meeting, not just, we just happen to have it on. So, great. Any other questions on that?
The one thing I just hope, and I think we talked about this earlier, that as both of these task forces go forward, that there will be an effort to have substantive conversation on the board as well about the issues that come up. More important to do it quickly on yours because it's happening so fast. It's 2 meetings a month, but same with yours, so there can be a constant flow of discussion across the political task force and the board.
Absolutely, you're right, and I think we'll kind of add that as an extra task too, because I know we spoke briefly about kind of our timeline on getting these materials to our task force members, but I think we also probably should acknowledge how quickly the turnaround should be to get it to the general body as well, so thank you.
Great. Joe?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. One, I wanted everybody to have a organizational chart that lists the staffing model as it is now. I noted FY17 in the top left corner. When you flip over to FY18, you'll see the enhancements in our budget and where those lie. Both the chief student advocate, the ombudsman, their program associate, currently it's a shared position that will go to full-time. And we add in FY18 to the state board staff and operations support specialist. Where these people are slotted reflects the language in the budget that comes out of the education committee, where these new positions were allocated in the office budgets. The Office of the Ombudsman was awarded an extra half a program associate, same for the Office of the Student Advocate. So I think as we look at the FY18 budget, this is pretty much what we have, unless there are efforts to reprogram from program support to staff. If we start looking at the FY19, we need to really think about, do these positions fill the needs for each individual office and the agency as a whole? I think the one position that's really intended in some way, looking at the language around it in the FY18 budget from the Education Committee to support the 3 offices within the agency, is this new operations support specialist. It was clearly given to SBOE with the directive that it would free up staff time to allow state board staff to do more engagement and outreach work. But I think there's also language that clearly says that should support Joyanna and Faith's offices in procurement and HR functions. I think going forward, we need to hold the heads of each, and as board members, we need to hold the heads of each office accountable for best utilizing staff and meeting the goals of their departments. Ultimately, they're the directors of their offices. I know Joy and Faith had some questions or concerns about the operations support specialist, and I'd invite them to raise any questions.
Closed session for that, or is that?
At this point, if we're talking general about the position, that is all public. If we start talking about individuals and relationships to other staff, we may take a break and go to a closed session.
Okay.
So, you had questions about the position description. It doesn't make
Yes.
any. Those types of things are certainly on the table for an open session.
Right, so as I mentioned, over email, I think it was, the governance committee as well as, Faith was on email and call, is that it we collectively, that includes the chief student advocate as well as myself, John Paul, advocated for this role because we knew that operationally we're still having some challenges in terms of the speed of getting some things done. And I think part of it was because we really only have a staff assistant and John Paul, and it's really not his role at all to do some of these things. And so the hope was to bring in someone somewhat more senior who may have a finance background and could really quickly get up to speed on procurement, like you said, human resources, and kind of serve as that liaison in some respects. And so we kind of had a conversation over email and made some edits to make the role slightly more senior, really focusing not as much on the administrative functions, but on the operations support, with the hope that it would be a college graduate, maybe someone who's worked a couple years, and even maybe, I don't even know that we fully discussed this, but like that person could be, I don't know if it would be appropriate, like chief. I know you talked about like a CFO or something like that. So I think that was the thought.
Yeah, I would echo the same sentiments that you say. As we were reading the initial position description, it didn't seem to really. I think it was reflective of what we thought was the amount of money that might be available for the position, but not fully reflective of what we would hope for in the position. So in some ways, I don't want to speak for John Paul, but I know that it's a lot for John Paul and Janika, and just having these roles, plus there are other roles, and there's no one that's really fully focused on some of the things that we've said we wanted in the past. And when we were on the record at the Committee on Education hearing, I mean, there were a lot of issues that were raised, and we were like, we think that this would be better if we had a person who was focused on it full time. And I think some of the issues that we raised and some of the things that we wanted remedied were not necessarily reflected in the way that I thought we would hope for them to be reflected in there. Because I do think as the agency continues to grow, we need, and it will, we need the appropriate infrastructure to do that. Other agencies have an area or a person who is completely focused in that area. And we do maybe not procure a whole lot of money compared to other agencies, but we do a lot of procurement because we don't have a lot of things internally. And so having someone who can be wholly focused on that and really paid appropriately to be able to focus on that in the way that we desire, not just procurement, but also HR, even as we are trying to do position descriptions for people and like follow up with DCHR and understanding all the different things and different notifications are coming in. Having someone who could really focus on that, I think, will be important. And you do want someone who's well, has had a few years of experience in that area and can get up to speed quite quickly. So I think some of the adjustments that we made to the PD and then the adjustments that John Paul added onto that, I do think are reflective of really hiring someone who can pay attention to those things and also free up the staff who's currently focused on it to focus on other things that they probably would like to focus on.
I guess for me, the question comes back to John Paul. The position will report to him. It is in the state board portion of the budget. And does it meet the needs of your portion of the budget and the general need for oversight of the other offices or support of the other offices in the procurement and HR functions? Moving past the October 1 date, both the student advocate and the ombudsman will be independent, have independent personnel and procurement authority. The board will retain oversight. I think it's a little fuzzy as to what exactly that means. But looking back at the language around the committee report to both of your offices, the council was pretty clear that the chairman wanted you to have this independent authority. It's not clear who would support you. I think this position is designed to do that a little bit, and I think we've got to be very clear going forward and ask for either support within your different offices of the agency or an enhancement going forward to make sure this is a position supports those admin functions. But I think that's an FY19 question that we can talk about more in September. For now, I think the question becomes, do we as board members, and does JP as the administrator of the SBOE feel that this position will allow him to meet the needs and be responsible to the taxpayers of the district, or do we need to consider a reprogramming?
I think the revised position description gets a lot closer. I mean, I think that the original position description is what was provided by DCHR, and part of their efforts and part of the mayor's effort has been to limit the number and types of classified positions that there are in the district. So they strongly encourage agencies to use sort of stock position descriptions, which don't fit us well. And so I think the revised position description gets a lot closer to helping to reduce some of the, frankly, the enormous amounts of stress that Jamaica and I carry, especially during this time of year, of trying to get everything done and trying to make sure that we actually get all of our procurement done and making sure that all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted. I was getting that backwards. So I think it does get a lot closer. I do worry that the funding that we have available, which is limited, is not going to be enough to get a candidate that will meet everything on that position description. And that worries me, to put out the position description, go through the entire process, which we've done a number of times this year, and it takes between 2 and 3 months to try to get someone on board. If we go through the process and find no one, then we have to start over with a reprogramming and try to transfer some things in. So, yes, the position description as written, I think, gets us a lot closer to freeing up some of my time and Jamaica's time to actually do what we're hired to do. So I think that is going to be very helpful. I don't think this is going to be the sort of panacea to fix all of our woes on this, but I think it's a really strong step forward. I think it's worth putting out at the level that we have to see what we get, even if it's not if it ends up not being exactly what we're looking for.
Can I add something I don't have a board member? I think it feels like a slight mischaracterization to say this is a state board position. The state board is comprised of all of you elected officials, but it's an agency. And so when we went into Chairman Grasso, we asked for a role that would support all of us. That was the only reason the chairman gave it to us, because he said he heard that we were complaining about some of the stuff operationally and felt like, yeah, I and others added 2 more offices to the state board without a lot of support. I should then add some more support. So we did have some questions about reporting structure too, because we felt like it's also a position that all 3 of us collectively asked for. And I think it was because there were 3 entities there that he was willing to give it to the agency. So that's why we weighed in and said, we really think this is someone who has to meet our needs, because it's not just, I don't want it to be said, and I'm saying you said this, that it's sort of like the state board sort of doing us a favor or doing some administrative functions. It was actually intended to support the addition of this.
So regardless of the intent, I think, and first let me say, I completely agree. I think it is within the agency of the State Board of Education because of the combined advocacy of the 3 offices. And I think that's a model that we need to use more going forward. I think that can demonstrate that we can get more. Looking at the committee report, it is not clear that it goes for the agency of the state board. The way that the operating budget is actually written, it appears to read it's for the office of the state board, just as the halftime enhancements to the program associate budgets are clearly for the office of the Ombudsman for Public Education and the office of the student advocate. Now that said, because of the hybrid nature of the office of the State Board of Education, we have oversight of not just John Paul and the agency that works on behalf of the elected members. We also have oversight and a responsibility to support the other offices. And I think this position. There is some language that's a little ambiguous, but it makes it clear the intent is to support procurement and HR functions of your offices. And I want to make sure that we're getting someone that can do those things, but we also have to be clear that, you know, if we do need to create or designate staff that is designed to support the agency, we may need to do that. Part of this is a structural question. Do multiple positions support the agency, or do they each support the individual offices? I would argue that we probably need to clarify this moving forward with the committee and the council as to what this needs, and do we need even more to support the full agency functions?
So I would agree that we need more to, over time, to support the functions of the agency, but I would also say I don't think it's that hard of an exercise for us to move boxes in order to reflect that. And I think about other agencies, and I've mentioned this before, Department of Housing and Community Development, which is an agency that my husband is within. They also have, I think, another independent office that is located within them. And they provide staffing as well as, I want to say the tenant advocate, that's not right, I think it's something about rent. But they provide,
Rental Housing Commission.
yes, thank you. See, I knew you would know. You would know, okay. So they provide administrative as well as a lot of these same functions that we're talking about. And I don't think, and maybe you just had to be there in the committee hearings that we've had, in the meetings that we've had with the chairman, and I would actually really invite, and I know it's hard as board members, but I really invite you to attend these hearings, because I think sometimes there are things that are said that can't be captured there, in the way that the chairman spoke about some of this shouldn't be hard, and he was asking us, why is it hard? And that was when we said, well, we really think it's hard because we don't have the appropriate infrastructure. I think moving to an independent agency was something that the board members at the time felt was necessary. But there was so much infrastructure that was lost from being within OSSI, and we are working to grow from that. But I do think that although we have asked for some independence, I think what becomes frustrating is that a lot of times it's like, well, it's not clear if we should be doing this and who should be doing that. I mean, we are a part, and I'm not saying just you, but we just heard this over time, that we are in the agency, we are part of the agency, we asked for independence just because of the types of, I mean, there were challenges. I don't want to make it seem like there weren't, but also because of the nature of the work that we do, we thought that that was what was stated maybe in the intent when the offices were created. But I do think that maybe we do need to have the exercise of moving some of the boxes to reflect that, and I think the only barrier to that is just, I guess, the will, to kind of move things around. And I know that there are certain functions that we, gone back and forth before what the boxes have looked like, and talk about that internally. But I do think maybe over time we do need to ask for additional administrative supports for individual offices. I think we talked about that internally, because it will get, you all will have more work that we've done, and your staff will continue to grow, our staff will continue to grow. But right now, I do believe that we can at least have some other dotted lines, or straight lines, to kind of reflect some of that on the on this hierarchy or org chart, in order to really reflect that, because I think there was more captured in the hearing than what's there, and I do really hope that we can continue to build the structure that will work best to support the needs of everyone.
So kind of along Faith's statement just now, similar to what you're describing, kind of sounds like what we were like under OSSI, and like to Faith's point, as the conversion happened from us being under OSSI to being independent, that infrastructure was not transitioned over. OSSI has a separate procurement section, a separate HR section, a separate IT section. Even under the old board, where even though I was there briefly, every two board members had a staff assistant and a policy analyst. And so when that transition happened, a lot of the things needed as far as HR, and sorry. that was pre-2007, right? But a lot of the things, infrastructure structure-wise did not necessarily translate over. And I remember that when there were issues, I mean, there were times where I was the only staff and, you know, a board member may ask me something, but I was challenged in being able to move on that. So then I would contact Boss's chief of staff, and then they would say no. But then the board members would tell me, you know, you work for us, and this is what has to happen. And so that tap dance got really, really sketchy. And it was even explained to me that Ossie is my manager and the board was my supervisor. And so I think that this would have to be clearly defined, because we could end up similarly in a similar situation.
I completely agree, and that's why I have a lot of hesitancy about the way that things have moved over the last couple of years. And I think these have dealt a hand, and we've got to find a structure to fit that hand. I don't think we're there yet, but I also think that we need to be able to hold the executives of each of the offices under the agency accountable for fulfilling their mission with the resources available. And part of the state board's mission is oversight of the other two agencies, and support of those other two agencies.
So,
Like, unless there are questions about this going forward, but. So right now, there's nothing, no desire. I think we'll revisit this in September, if we feel we need to do any reprogramming with the budget for FY18. But I wanted everybody to know that that could be something that we need to look at if we're not getting candidates that meet the needs of all three of the offices under the agency.
So I just want to say, I think this is very hard to follow, and there's a lot to it, and I think it's very important. So I just want to say that my understanding from the way Joe put it out there was very much that this was going to be a position that what was housed in the state board part was very much to support everything. That's what I heard, and I just want to say I think that's right, and I hear you being concerned to make sure that's the case, and I'm agree with that. So that's my summary of what I heard.
Right, I mean, I just would like to add, I mean, certainly I think the last year has been very challenging, I think, from my perspective, and certainly I don't want to speak for Faith, while we were trying to figure out organizational structure. But what I would say is that the revisions that we made in the statute were to really align ourselves nationally with what the kind of office we wanted to be. They were not to say that we don't want oversight, because actually I'll take some credit, it's partly my idea to go through this committee, right? So it's not, I'm not saying, you know, clearly oversight is very important to me, and important to us, which is why I went through many iterations of like what was possible. But I do think, I just want to make sure that, I don't want to go back to the council, and I'm sure you don't either, or even John Paul and the board members, to say that we couldn't get this right. And I don't think the chairman has looked upon us very favorably in terms of our challenges internally and trying to get this right organizationally. And so what I would say is that we want to be thoughtful about reporting structure for this position, because we did advocate collectively, because we believed in it. And I was asked specifically, like, well, should we put one in your office or the chief student advocate, you know, the student advocate's office, or where do we put it? And we said collectively, no, we think the best place is to be in the agency, because it's really an agency function. So that's why I just want to be careful about the language we use, because, you know, we agreed to this because we thought it was an office, you know, position that would function really equally to support all of our needs.
So just one comment on that. I think that was the offices. It was not the board members who were a part of those conversations. The board did not vote to support or to request changes to the statute. The board did not take any formal position, nor was a request for the board to take a position brought to us before the legislation went forward. So I think it's the right move in a number of ways, but I want to be clear on who asked, and I think that was your offices going to the council and asking for
So
those
we
changes.
did, but the board also wasn't absent in that. So Jack and Karen were with us as we were going through this process.
I'm just saying that the board did not vote to take a formal position. That is all I'm saying.
Yeah, and we were also asked, to be quite that some of this would help, with the dysfunction that, we're not saying came from, that we weren't contributors. I think that there was a lot, and I think that, even the state board is still learning, from theory and practice and moving to where we are. So I know that the board didn't take, an official action on it, but I would say that it wasn't, at least not from my perspective, I think it was secret. We definitely do, believe that we can, of course, go to the council, ask for things and stuff of that nature, but also I know as we went along in the process, it definitely became very clear that we needed to also have even a more united front as we're moving towards things with the omnibus bill. But I think that's why, as I stated previously, I really, and I know that the board is very busy with a lot of things, but I know sometimes when we go to these hearings and it's only Jack and Karen and then us, sometimes it would appear that the board doesn't, isn't taking interest in some of those things. And I know that it can be hard to make it to the meetings, but I also think that that also helps us with having a much more united front as we're going forward and asking certain things to make this implementation. I know that's hard. I also have to go to hearings for my board seat, and it's hard. So I have to, talk with the other board members that I have on the library board as to who can do that at different times so that we can all be present. And I think now also having the administration committee is also helpful because we have another place to go to instead of just the leadership alone. So now we're having a lot more conversation with you, General, and also emailing other things, but before we didn't have that infrastructure, so I think that that's helpful.
I just wanted, because I was in the midst of all of this, reiterate that 2.5 years ago, we had nothing. We were like abandoned. One day we're having an agency supporting us, and the next day we're on our own with nothing. No, and then our executive director. So I don't have a background in or procurement, and neither did Jack, and we did the best we could. Now I'm not saying that we hit all the boxes or checked all the boxes, but we did the best we could under the circumstances. And I'm not going to apologize for where we are, but that's why we spent the last year trying to put together bylaws and policy procedures and work together to make this a strong agency. And we just need everybody's support and everybody working together because we can't work as a house divided. We can't with no numbers. So.
And Ruth, I think to answer your question, I don't think we presented this well. So I'm not going to spend time presenting, but I'm just going to give you like the nuts and the bolts. So there was a position description that was classified, I thought,
I was trying to end this.
Yeah, and I'm editing it too. I just want to be clear, because I realize if you're not in the conversation, what would you think about what was being presented? So I thought it was classified too low. I think Faith also agreed, right? It sounds like we're just.
It sounds like everybody's on the same page.
No, it sounded, the problem is I think we're saying, let's proceed the lower classification, which I still think is a mistake. But the question that I still have remaining, that's what I heard, but maybe I'm wrong, is to go up to the 5.
Right.
Okay, I didn't hear that.
No, that was in the revisions that I sent.
Okay, so it's to proceed with what we agreed to. I didn't quite
that's a
understand
long
that.
process. They can be kind of slow. But.
Okay, so we're reclassifying, so this is helpful for me. We're reclassifying.
We just can't put it. What my suggestion was, we don't have money to put to it.
Yeah.
But, this is the money we have. The classification, honestly, it's a matter of.
Okay, so that's helpful. And then what I would also ask is that Faith and I be part of the hiring process as well. I know we haven't gotten there yet, but that would be great.
All right. Any other items on the agenda? That's it.
I have good welfare. Good welfare is how you end a lot of meetings. Just say it. Yeah, things that are going on, and I really wanted Marcus to be here, but Marcus is not here.
Stepped out to the table.
Okay, well, anyway, so everybody should get their city paper tomorrow, because Marcus and I have a piece in the city paper. And not so much about the issues that we normally deal with as a board, but really our recommendations for the new chancellor, in terms of both our hopes and our concerns with the CPS, so.
Can I say something before you? Unfortunately. You already know.
Marcus already knows it, yeah.
All right, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second? Then move to second.
Yeah, no, it's not on the record.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Feel free.
Oh, okay, I just want to